everybody. I apologise as my first remark, in that I'm a sponsor of the event. So a little bit of an advert at the beginning for my business, but I promise I'll keep it short. And then secondly, to say that I'm a bit of a procurement old lag. So I've been in procurement for 30 years. So please don't hold that against me, particularly when I talk about Odesma, which is about harnessing software as a service, everything as a service, as a consultancy model, which is, I think, quite modern. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about our survey that was just hot off the press, which asked a whole bunch of procurement folk how ready they were for Brexit. So really, I'm hopeful that you will add some comments as we go through, because I'm going to report back to you the survey results and maybe give a little bit of economic context behind the survey and behind why I think people are saying what they are. But it's makes for some interesting reading, I think, in particular in terms of a lot of procurement organisations aren't really ready for Brexit at this point of time, but I can take you through the findings of the study. And then we'll talk through different elements of Brexit. So we'll look at risk, we'll look at the impact on cost, impact on people, etc. And then I'll close out and hopefully, as I say, you'll ask a few questions. If I just talk about Odesma, which is a business that I formed almost 3 years ago, I just thought I'd talk to you about the genesis of the idea. So, for my background, I've worked in line procurement. I worked for ICL Fujitsu as a direct buyer for about 6-7 years. I worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers as a consultant. I've worked for a e-platform provider back in 2000 when the first e-commerce wave happened, called ShareMax. They're no longer about, but they sort of reflect somewhat what's gone on today with e-sourcing solutions, platform solutions, etc., that are on demand. So I think when people talk about the cloud, it's not really that new, because it was about back in the year 2099. And more latterly, I worked for the third biggest procurement outsourcing company in the world, where I was executive director. In essence, I ran the procurement outsourcing business of exchanging globally. We had about 600 staff around the world, predominantly category managers, and I also ran the HR outsourcing business. And really, through that experience of being involved in running that business for 10 or 11 years, I formed a different view of how procurement services might be provided. And actually, I used to sit in an office in Manchester, near to Manchester Airport, with a colleague, Steve Traynor, who I'm in partnership with, as well as Nick Ford at the back there. And we thought that there must be a different way of doing things, of bringing resources together to help companies transform procurement, or to assist companies with a particular change requirement in procurement. And we thought that if we looked at the economy, the digital economy, and everything being on demand, if we looked at the business to consumer market with lots and lots of solutions appearing, lots of easy to use solutions, lots of solutions that you can pick up and run with if you want and then drop. We thought, well, why can't we bring that to procurement transformation? And we also looked and thought about all of the procurement consultants that are in the market. We did a poll, and we think there's about 600 procurement interims just in the UK market. And when we were at exchanging, we worked with quite a number of these people, and a lot of them were absolutely exceptional. There were people who'd embarked on a career as an interim. I think sometimes people feel that interims take on a role because they've just been made redundant. There's lots of interims out there who've made a conscious decision to move into the interim marketplace because they can make good money at it, and they get lots of different assignments. So the way that we looked at it was that we thought that we could create a business that could provide a set of services on an everything as a service basis. So really, even though we're all in our 50s, harnessing modern thinking, what we're seeing in the business to consumer marketplace, and deploying that as a consultancy model. And the three of us have all worked in line procurement, consultancy, outsourcing, etc. So we've got a fairly good understanding of how you do things, how you make procurement change happen. Now, you might want to hold my age against me. Some of yes, some no's. So the way that we saw it from a procurement perspective is that there's different ways of making procurement transformation happen. The first is, in big organisations, can be just to let your stakeholders do it. Let them buy the stuff, let them make the deals, etc. Not necessarily optimal, but still a lot of organisations operate that way. The second is to deploy a procurement function, to create a procurement function in your business employ people to do deals on behalf of the company, etc. Typically, that might cost about 1% of the spend under management, typically, give or take, and it will deliver results. I guess the challenge that all of you face is that over time, those results become smaller and the procurement people become perhaps a little bit jaded or tired, and they don't necessarily know everything there is about all of the categories that they manage, because there's always a press for better efficiency to have fewer procurement people in organisations. So that it's a workable model. It's what the majority of the marketplace looks like, but it doesn't necessarily always deliver best practice, latest thinking results to the procurement journey. The third model is that you bring in procurement consultants. You go to Accenture or PricewaterhouseCoopers or KPMG, and you bring them in to help you make a transformation in procurement. It's great. I used to do it. I thought it was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. Almost the best part of my life in procurement, except for Odesma, of course. And typically, they will bring people in who are very driven to make change in your organisation. If they're doing category management, quite often they won't know the category, but they'll know the process of sourcing, and they will make transformation happen in your business. Not necessarily completely current in their thinking, but they'll make it happen. The results will happen, typically, and they will probably cost you 3 or 4% of the spend under management during the period that they're in your business. Of course, when they leave, things might deteriorate unless they create the new organisation or help the new organisation, the existing organisation develop. The latest wave in the last 10 years has been procurement outsourcing. So procurement outsourcing is trying to provide a bridgehead between consulting, and the approach in consulting to make change happen in procurement, and line procurement. Now, I used to run a procurement business. Tell you, typically, we would charge about 1% of the spend under management, not dissimilar to the cost of procurement internally. We would deploy a bit like consultants, have a bow wave savings, 5 or 6% year 1, 2, and then make smaller incremental savings. We would tie you in, we'd seek to tie you in, and what you would find is that over time, the deal becomes a little bit tired, and you'd get a bit tired of the deal. So what we thought we would do is create Odesma. Odesma's model is basically renew and refresh. So in essence, what we will do is bring experts from the subject matter expert marketplace, if you like, interims. We will bring what we believe are best of breed technology solutions to bear independently, not of our making, but of third-party providers that are out there. We will deploy our project management skills or expert project managers to your business to help make the change happen, and then we'll leave. And because it's on demand, we'll give you 4 to 6 weeks notice at any moment to cancel the contract. So if your business strategy changes, you want to do something else, you don't like that category, you don't like that systems implementation or whatever, we will leave. And the reason there's 4 weeks is because you need a transition. You need something, you need to be left with something. So our model is very flexible and is focused on making change happen in procurement, but embodying the on-demand, the gig economy, if you like. So it's a different way of working, I think. And to boot, to date, we've formed in November 2.5 years ago. We've worked with the likes of everybody up to Schenker, who are a 20 billion euro organisation, working with them in Europe. So Brexit's not being held against us yet. We're working with Brambles, the palletisation organisation, also known as CHEP in the UK. They're about $5.5 billion. What I'm telling you this is because I think that lots of big organisations have harnessed the idea and can see sense in the approach that we're deploying. Okay, so I've just jumped through a few slides. This model here, the circle on the right, just seeks to describe what we do, the everything as a service model. So bringing category management, supply market insight, both from the category managers and from third-party providers like Barrow, like SmartCube, etc. Bringing in spend and savings tracking tools, bottom right corner, 3 or 4 o'clock. There's a number of organisations out there that have absolutely superb on-demand solutions. And then e-procurement, e-sourcing type solutions we'll also bring to bear through relationships we have. And then at the bottom of it is that we underpin that with our own experience in terms of governing the programme. Okay. Okay, that's the advert over. So you can breathe a sigh of relief. Okay. What I wanted to talk to you about is a survey that we have run on the impact of Brexit on procurement and the state of readiness of procurement for Brexit. Now, you're probably, if you're like me, really tired of hearing about all this stuff. We've got the general election, we had the Brexit referendum, we've had a whole series of elections around the world, etc., etc. Quite a dull topic, I think, at the moment. But I think it's quite important to think about where procurement is in the mix, because I think commentators would suggest there's going to be a big impact from Brexit, but there's also an unknown impact of Brexit. So what I thought I'd do is just talk through really what the 40 or 50 respondees have suggested to us against the survey that we've asked them to complete. And we'll kick off with the reach. So we've touched quite a variety of sectors, so retail to public sector to manufacturing. We've hit a range of companies up to the multi-billion organisations, and as we can see down here, spends of well over £1 billion per year, and organisations that are operating in a range of global markets. So we've been fairly comprehensive. The sample size is relatively small, but I think the findings are quite interesting and hopefully are representative of what is happening across procurement in the UK. Okay, so the first thing is, have you put plans in place for Brexit? And I thought this was really quite interesting, really, because I think that certainly having worked at the top of exchanging, reporting to the CEO, what was very central to most big businesses, certainly was central to exchanging, was having a risk register. Don't necessarily always see this cascaded into procurement, but certainly when I was at exchanging, it was cascaded to each of us, for each of the divisions of the business, asking us what we thought our key risks are. And the survey basically says that only about half of the organisations that we've polled have put in any sort of plans around Brexit. And also it says there is that it hasn't impacted particularly for 50% of the respondents in their risk register. But what's being said recently is producer prices have gone up 20% in the UK. And we don't know what will happen post-Brexit. So we don't know what will happen. I'll come back to this later on. We don't know what will happen with tariffs. So, for example, tariffs on agricultural products coming into Europe are 18%. So theoretically, if we're outside the EU and Brexit doesn't go well, and we can't agree a import-export governance process with the EU, there will be a whole series of tariffs applied to goods coming and going between the UK and the EU. And similarly in the US, automotive vehicles are pinged for 2.5% going into the United States. So we've got quite a complicated economic environment globally that undoubtedly will impact procurement people. Okay, and I guess the question for you is, are you already planning for Brexit? Are you filling in risk registers, thinking about what the things that might impact you are? Are you being asked to by the business? Anybody? No? Nobody's doing that? Or you don't want to answer me? Okay, so sounds a bit like a wait-and-see approach from all of you and the people that we've surveyed, which is, I don't know, I'm sort of, because I've been a procurement person, a consultant, but I've also run a business. I find that quite surprising, really. Oh, sorry. Are you scratching? No, you've got to answer the question now. Yes.
What we are doing is we're assessing our global companies for intertrade, because intertrade is very different from what actually is import and export tariffs. So we're looking at our intertrade companies to see what the difference is between potential barriers against what actually happens between divisions of.
Yeah, across borders, in other words.
Across borders, across the globe, because most of our provision comes literally from every part of the globe you can physically known to man we could get something from.
And what do you think the impact's going to be?
I think, subject to whether we come out with a good outcome or not, I think intertrade is probably going to be less than potentially what's going to happen if we come out with a not particularly good deal.
Yeah.
So I have a nasty feeling that our actual tariffs will go up massively, and so will their tariffs go up. but the question is how does the Prime Minister keep the economy basically going? Because the problem is we're going to have to if we keep the tariffs up, the scenario is then of course it's not producing business and it works the other way around. So how do you how are you going to manage the economy with it?
I'm just a procurement guy, I don't know.
Sort of the economy has an impact on all of us if we're not buying goods or services.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. I think, as I put here, there's going to be a whole series of risks for procurement. So I think that, what we see is potential impacts of Brexit and potential impacts and some real impacts that we've already seen as we build up towards Brexit, okay? We've already seen an impact on domestic inflation. So domestic inflation is starting to pick up because producer prices have gone up by 20% because of the fall in the value of sterling so far. That may go in either direction. That will level out in time because you get one hit of inflation and then it becomes the new normal, if you like, and inflation will drop back down, hopefully, to where it has been a year ago. The impact of changes in the way that the economy works can, in terms of inflation, can result in interest rates rising. So that will have an impact on your business in terms of its cost of capital and therefore its investment decisions, for example. It may have an impact on government investment levels, for example. So the government may well invest less or may more, depending on who the government is, but that will have a knock-on effect within the economy. And then finally, import and export tariffs could become an issue, and that depends on whether we revert to the World Trade Organization tariff structure or we get an agreement with the EU. But clearly, from the imponderables perspective, we don't actually know any of that. We can only guess. And I think that procurement people from the study see this as an issue, but as I say, most organisations at the moment are not preparing for this as an issue. And in terms of, sorry.
For some of us, this is already an issue rather than a risk.
Yeah.
The major impact the exchange rates had on commodity prices.
Yeah.
Particularly in our organisation, Royal Mail, fuel, massive part of our expenditure, and that's been hit straight away by the exchange rate. So, I mean, I'm interested in part of it from our procurement team point of view, is wondering what more we need to do apart from have it on a nice risk register somewhere that we need to do something at some point when it's clear what's going to happen next. But it's what more I'm interested in this particularly because I want to know what I think.
Well, I think at the end of this presentation, and I'll try and flick through most of the slides and we'll perhaps talk about it, is that most procurement people feel that they need to resource to the UK. You can't do that with fuel because it's dollar-based. But I think that what the survey says, what the feedback we had from individuals where we said, can you tell us specifically against 20 factors what you think you need to do? Basically, the majority, or the biggest number, shall I say, said that they need to resource to the UK. So to mitigate some of that risk in terms of exchange rates, though you can't mitigate all of it because input price is coming into the UK, but they felt that they will need to change suppliers and they will need to resource in the next 21 months to the UK. But in terms of fuel, you could hedge it, I guess, but you won't get a great hedge rate at this point in time. So I think it's really around thinking about your supply base, where your supply base are, I suppose, and thinking, if I think that Brexit will have a large negative impact, but we don't know, that's more of a political view, I think, than anything else, though an economic view as well, is if it is going to have a big issue to your business, then you need to think about your sourcing practices. And therefore, maybe you need to start planning about not sourcing so extensively in Europe or outside of Europe, for that matter. Does that answer your question?
Helpful. Sorry,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wasn't necessarily. We've just closed the survey, so I just thought more in terms of the impacts, in terms of what you might do. I think that is peculiar to each of your businesses. I think my point really from the survey is that and from a report that we've had written in collaboration with the Chamber of Commerce in the Northwest, is that you need to think about it in terms of the risk register or whatever device you use. Think about where your business sits, what the impacts might be, as you say, at Royal Mail fuel prices, and then think about what am I going to do to obviate a level of that risk. Now, worst case, that could be you're just going to put your prices up. But at the other end, it could be that you change the type of fuel that you use in the vehicles, I don't know, or change to other elements. Okay. Okay. Quite interesting that when asked, procurement people said they're the most affected by Brexit. I haven't felt that overwhelming response from all of you that this is the thing that is concerning you most. But in the survey, that's what they said. And then basically said that most of the other functions in the business would be impacted, but less so. I don't know if that's because we're all special.
I think it's biased. It's a difficult question.
Yeah. So a couple of points really about the impact of Brexit. It's going to affect everybody. Post-Brexit, the Great Repeal Bill, I don't know if you've come across this, the Great Repeal Bill is basically a bill that will be put before Parliament that says we keep everything as it is, all the laws. All the laws are formed under OJEU. So I always think of OJEU as procurement. It's not. OJEU is a framework of law within the European Union. And that Great Repeal Bill will come into be an act of Parliament as Brexit is completing. It has to be completed by April 2019, I think. And then change will happen from there. But maybe the biggest impact on procurement is around tariffs, and then the impact on the exchange rate, etc. The impact is uncertain for businesses across free movement and trade, which is a fundamental of the EU. You all watch the news, I'm sure you've seen this. So that's freedom of movement of goods, workers, citizens, so borderless, etc. Establishment of services. Establishment of services, because I've checked this, is setting a business up. So if we wanted to, as Odesma, set a business up in Germany, where we're working currently, that would be really easy to do. In a couple of years, that might not be so easy to do. So that could have the same impact for your business, and where you domicile your business, and therefore what tax you pay, etc., etc. And then the last piece is around freedom of movement of capital, which for those of us who are older, remember that you couldn't move money easily between countries if you go back 30, 40 years. Okay. In terms of growth, again, the positive mindset of procurement people. Most procurement people think that Brexit won't hamper your organisation's growth. I find that a little surprising, because everything else says it will. It'll hinder your ability to trade, potentially. It'll hinder your ability to borrow, and to borrow cheaply, yada, yada, yada. But most procurement people are very positive about Brexit. I don't know whether that's more of a political view or non-political view, and I'm trying to steer away from being political about Brexit. What the economists say is that in the long term, so Institute of Fiscal Studies, etc., that everything will settle down, and that their view is that the damage to the UK economy, if you like, will be a blip for 3 to 5 years or whatever, and then things will smooth out again as the new normal becomes normal, if you like. But that's for conjecture and for us to see. In terms of people, half of the respondents think they need to upskill their people, but most of them don't think you'll need more people. That might be because you're not allowed to have more people, but you're going to have more work to do, I suspect. Okay, and this builds on that point. A lot of respondents felt, as I said earlier, that you need to renegotiate contracts with existing suppliers, and you need to reevaluate and realign your supply base, which is what I mentioned earlier. And you also need to enhance your approach to risk management and contingency planning. But going back to the earlier point, that hasn't happened yet, because most of the respondents aren't planning around the risk. And that might be because from the top, that isn't coming down at this point in time. And interestingly, nobody felt that no changes need to be made. So again, the question to yourselves is, what are you doing? How are you planning for this? Are you ready? Okay, and then finally, almost finally, will Brexit disrupt procurement globally, or just those functioning in Europe? And more than half the respondents think that it will disrupt activities in Europe, but some think it will have a global implication. And that may be from a sourcing perspective, etc. But in terms of global disruption, it's going to change the relationships we have with other countries. So we will seek perhaps to shift who we trade with in the longer term, depending on what the outcome is with the discussions with the EU. And will have an impact on our freedom to trade, if you like. So that will create a disruptive effect in procurement. And I guess the question for me is, will we start moving the way that we trade away from Europe to other countries, and then will we see reciprocal arrangements with those countries? Because I think some of you, if you're intra-trading, for example, you're probably already seeing that already, as was mentioned. Okay. Just conscious of time. And I thought this was really interesting. Most people think your prices are going to go up. So do your executive and the board of your companies expect the prices to go up? Most companies I've worked in, they don't expect that to happen, certainly while you're in charge. Okay. But if producer prices have gone up 20% because of the depreciation of sterling, what impact is that having on your business? And how much of that can you pass on to your end user? And what does the CEO think? And the CFO think? So, and in reality, a lot of that impact hasn't come through yet for a lot of organisations because they hedge. And now it's starting to kick through, and you can see that in domestic inflation figures. Okay. And then we just asked, actually the CPO event team asked for some other comments. So they rang a few people, I think some of you who were attending, to ask what you thought, what your key concerns were. So there's just a miscellany here. But the one I thought was interesting was the farming one. I thought, that's 2 or 3% of the UK economy. Is that really such a big deal? But I guess if you're in retail and supermarket trades and so forth, it's a massive deal. And as I said, tariffs on agricultural products coming into the EU are 18%. So what impact will that have on us bringing stuff in from the EU and outside the EU? Okay. And I think we've covered most of the rest of it. Okay. So in conclusion, so whistle stop tour there. I quite like Donald Rumsfeld. I don't know what you think of him. Most people don't like him, as I understand. He was quite obnoxious, quite difficult to deal with, quite bristly. And when he said this statement, there are known knowns, there are things that we know that we know. There are known unknowns, that is to say there are things that we now know we don't know. But there are also unknown unknowns. You think of this as gobbledygook at this point, don't you? You think, well, what the hell? There are things we do not know, we don't know. Okay? When he first said that, they thought, he's a fool. But it really resonates for me with the current political situation, globally, if you like, is that there are things that are going to come and bite us in the bum because of Brexit and because of other changes globally that we don't know about at this point in time. We can't really guess at. We certainly don't recognise them at this point in time. So quite a prophetic statement, I think, by Donald. And similarly, we've commissioned an article which you're all welcome to take away. And this was written by Christian Spence, who, as I say, is head of research and policy for the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce. He's an economist by background and journalist. And he's put some thoughts down which you're very welcome to take away with you, just about what Brexit might mean. And I think certainly when we were pulling this together, I had to sort of think, well, what is OJU? Because I thought it was public sector purchasing directive, and it's clearly not. That's just my limited knowledge, really. So he's postulated some thoughts about how things will work out. But the clear thing about Brexit is we just don't know. There's lots of uncertainty. And really, the question I think is you as procurement people have got to be asking yourself or doing is thinking about what the impact might be in your business. Because you might not be asked it today, but you will be asked it in the future. And if producer prices start to impact the stuff that you buy and your prices start going up, then you're going to be in a quite awkward situation. I've worked with some really, really difficult bosses, and you need to be ahead of them, I think, ahead of the game. Okay, that's it.